welcome to Neuropsychology of Trafficking Trauma. I'm Lauren Beal, Senior Program Manager at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. NCJA-FCJ is a national nonprofit judicial membership organization, and we provide training and technical assistance to courts around the country on topics related to juvenile and family courts, including child sex trafficking. This month, we are holding a series of webinars and conversations in recognition of National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Now, today, we are joined by Toni McKinley, and I would like to let her introduce herself.
So I started doing this work with other women, children, men who have been sex trafficked back in 2012. But I've been working with, probably unknowingly working with survivors since about 1997. After I got my degree of being a high school teacher. So I've been working with kids from hard places for a really long time, and it's been my passion. And I started studying a lot about psychology and especially neuropsychology, really to start understanding myself, because I didn't get any healing for many, many, many years. I didn't get it as a kid and sought it out as an adult, and wanting to understand more about myself and the kids that were in my life every day who were having significant problems and behavioral issues and such, and how to best help them. And so I've been teaching this for quite a while now, just to really help other people understand the trauma of trafficking and the toll that it takes on people who have experienced this trauma, and how do we help people who have been trafficked? What's the best way to be able to bring them the help that they need? So we're going to go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint here. And make sure, if you think of questions along the way, so you don't forget them, to type them into that website that they told you about. I think it's in the chat, because I'd really like to be able to answer any questions that you have. All right, so we're going to talk about really what is neuropsychology. We're going to start off with that. It's a term that maybe you've been seeing around a lot. It seems to be popping up more and more. Neuropsychology is concerned with how a person's nervous system and their brain influence their cognition and their behavior. So cognition as in their brain functioning, and their behavior, what comes out because of what's happening in the brain. Neuropsychology often addresses how injuries or illness can affect the brain and their behavior. And so it's really fascinating, because for so many years, especially if you grown up 80s and 90s, and I know in the 2000s we've been trying to be more trauma informed, but we really were taught to kind of like pull it up by the bootstraps, suck it up, do better, just do good, not really understanding what's happening up here and why is it so difficult for people to make different choices so they don't continue the same cycles that they're going through. And so that's where neuropsychology comes into, is really trying to figure out what's happening up here that's influencing the behavior that's being displayed. And it gives you, when you know this, understand it, then you can make better choices and offer better choices in order to help the person who is struggling. So what is trafficking trauma? Most of you probably know this. Survivors who escape trafficking live with physical and psychological scars. You know, it's very interesting. So when I first started getting involved in this work, everyone wanted to focus on the outside, the physical, and rescuing and throwing things at them that might make them feel better. But we were ignoring the psychological part of it. And so people were being re-exploited or not being able to get back on their feet. And now it's finally coming to everyone's attention that we really need to focus on the psychological scars that are long lasting, long term, because this is a trauma that happened repeatedly over and over, which makes it so complex. The emotional wounds last long after the bodies heal. So after the broken bones are cured or healed, we have these wounds that we can't see that are up here. But what some may not realize is we can see it through behavior. The behavior of the individual can tell you what still needs to be healed up here in the brain. Psychological challenges that are left for them to deal with are PTSD or CPTSD, which is complex trauma, anxiety, depression, panic disorder, substance abuse, suicidal ideation, Stockholm syndrome, which you'll hear a lot of people use the term trauma bonding, right? Bonding with their abuser, and a whole host of other things. This isn't the limit. This is just some of what's left for those who've been trafficked that they have to deal with. And I've had to deal with a lot of those. Well, actually, all of these on here and then some. And so one that's not on here that's very common is dissociative identity disorder, or just, struggles with disassociating and staying present. And so we'll talk a little bit about that too. So why neuropsychology of trafficking trauma? Well, it's important to learn about how the brain responds to trafficking trauma so that you have more empathy and understanding on how to treat the behavior in order to find appropriate solutions for healing instead of doing more harm. So those of you who are licensed counselors or in some other type of medical field understand and that, you take an oath to do no harm. And so that's always on the top of our minds is what if the choices that we're making or the ways that we're trying to help, is it doing more harm? But it's, there's lots of great resources out there, but they could do more harm because they're not the right kind of resource that person needs. So an example would be, well, this person needs a place to live. They have nowhere to go. So we're going to put them in a home. And this one just happens to be available. So we're going to put them in a home. But if that home doesn't have the understanding of what trafficking is, if they don't have the training on how to help someone who has that complex trauma, if they don't have the resources to give that person in order to heal, that person will end up leaving, running away, never coming back, and thinking that every place out there is awful. I will never, ever go into a home again. And I hear this repeatedly over and over again because we're just putting people places thinking we're solving the problem because they're there. And we have to really understand how complex this is, and not everyone needs a home to live in. There could be some other resources, or there's resources where they have the experience and the resources available to help them. And we want to put them in those kinds of places, right? So that's just an example of how something that seems good could actually end up doing more harm. And so fully understanding the problem and the way that survivors themselves don't necessarily understand how they're suffering can really help you give them the right resources they need so that so they can go on and live their lives. I mean, really, they just want to be like you and me and not be hurt anymore and not have pain anymore and figure out what do I like? What am I good at? Right. And a lot of them don't even know that there is anything else that they can do. And so it's our job to try to guide them to get to that place. And so understanding the neuropsychology of trafficking trauma will go a long way in being able to help the people that you're interacting with that are coming in your path who have been trafficked. So we're going to start with just the general about the central nervous system. You can see the diagram there of how it's showing the nerves going throughout the whole body, stemming from the brain. And this controls most functions of your body and your mind, your central nervous system. And it's very basic. I'm going to explain all this in a very basic way. It's 3 functions, and that is the functions are sensory input, information processing, and motor output. That's basically the main part of it. So we're not going to get all technical into a lot of different names, but this is what you need to know is that our central nervous system is always taking in things, always processing things, and then we have a response or a behavior. That's our motor output, right? And so that's what you're seeing with each person that you're interacting with. And each trauma survivor and trafficking trauma survivor this is happening. But there's like a glitch in the system, which makes it really difficult to understand why we as survivors, and I'm going to say we because I've done this too, don't make always the best choices. And it confuses people, and especially when you're trying to help. So we'll start with sensory input. This is stimuli that is perceived by our senses, like your smell, your sight, touching, tasting, and hearing. So just basically your 5 senses. And if you're wherever you're sitting at right now in your world, you are using all those senses and taking in sensories, right? Things that you're hearing and smelling and tasting and seeing and feeling. Anything that you perceive using your senses can be called sensory input. So if you think about this, that's a lot of information. I mean, if you're just sitting in your room right now where you're at, there's a lot to take in if you pay attention. And your body, your central nervous system is taking that in whether you're paying attention or not, right? And it may recall that information later, or it may decide that it's not important and not bring it up. So when you're being trafficked, these senses can be heightened, and it can bring some really strong triggers back to a person when they come back around in life when you're not in danger, which causes a lot of behaviors that may not be adaptive to society. And so our body is constantly processing, and there are certain parts of our body that I'll talk about in a minute that are trying to keep us safe, right? And so it's using all these senses to determine, am I safe or not? Am I in danger? Do I need to react? How should I react? And this is constantly going on, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. So we have the prefrontal cortex. This prefrontal cortex, it's receiving input from multiple regions of the brain to process the information so that it can adapt accordingly to your environment. So here's what the prefrontal cortex contributes to. This is what it's helping you do every day: focusing one's attention, predicting the consequences of one's actions, like anticipating events in the environment, impulse control, managing emotional reactions, planning for the future, and coordinating and adjusting complex behaviors. So if any of you have kids, or you can think of yourself under the age of 25 and as a child, the decisions that you make, how difficult was it to focus, right? Just normal teenage growth stuff. You probably didn't do that well in some cases. And it's because our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the age of 25. So just think about an average child or an average teenager. This is difficult. This can be difficult for them to do. It's not impossible, but if you leave them alone without guidance, they may not make a very good decision. They're not going to anticipate the events in their environment very well. They may not be able to fully focus as well as someone who's over the age of 25. They may kind of experience some blocks in my future. What do you mean my future? When I'm 30, I'm older than old. I mean, do you remember saying that? I remember thinking that when I'm 30, it's like, shoot me, I'm old. I can't think past that. I can't even imagine being 30. When really 30, you're kind of just getting your life started. You know, you're figuring everything out in your 20s, and maybe you got married or had kids, or maybe you didn't. You waited till you're 30 so that you're more mature and can make better decisions. So that's just your average kid. So now you have a trafficked kid whose prefrontal cortex is also underdeveloped. And because of trauma, their brain is not all online, right? It's not processing the way that your child's brain may be, who doesn't have trauma in their life. And so the impulse control, there probably isn't any, right? Kids make really split decisions. If you've worked with kids who are chronic runaway, what's their first, you put them in a back at home with their parents, or in a foster home, or somewhere that you think is good, and maybe it is good, but something happens and they're triggered. Their impulse is to run, right? Those chronic runners, they're just going to go. They're not going to think about what happened the last time I ran. You know, where did that get me last time? They're not predicting the consequences of their actions well. They can't anticipate events as well in their environment. And the future, forget that. I know very, very few, if any, so I actually can't even think of any, but I'm just going to say maybe there are some young kids who've been trafficked who actually can imagine a future for themselves outside of that, which is so important for them to understand. This information I'm giving you is not too complex for them to learn. Most of these kids that I work with are so relieved to learn that, oh, you know, people expect me to do A, B, and C, but I just can't seem to do it, and I don't know why. And now I know, Like, this is our brain. This is science, right? So I'm going to give you some solutions and ideas on the way of how to help kids through this that have been traumatized. But I want you to understand that if you're banging your head up against the wall because that kid just isn't responding the way that you want to, and you're offering them all kinds of opportunities and whatnot, there's a reason for it. And working with kids that have been trafficked can require a lot of patience, a lot, especially depending on the diagnosis, right? If you're working with someone who is bipolar or borderline personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, really, really requires a lot of patience and continuing to repeat yourself a lot. And so here's one reason why. Not only is the prefrontal cortex not fully developed, but it's been damaged and traumatized because of trauma. So here's an example. We have a 16-year-old victim that ran away and is meeting with a judge. The judge asks her why she was with a 23-year-old man in his apartment. She becomes nervous. Her prefrontal cortex isn't developed fully, as we just learned, and has been traumatized through trafficking. So she cannot predict in the moment that lying is not going to get her in more trouble. The part of the brain that provides self-control can't communicate well with the other part of the brain that controls the flight or fight response because it hasn't grown all the connections needed, the neural pathways in the brain, things that need to connect and be repeated over and over for it to become like an automatic reaction. And so it doesn't mean that she doesn't know that lying is bad, right? When you are having anxiety, whatever that trigger was for her that caused her brain to become very nervous and scared, and basically call it like kind of flipping your lid. That's why kind of you can see me on the screen with my hand going up like this. It's not that they don't know it's wrong. It's just the first thing that comes to them in the moment in order to protect themselves. So it could be as simple as, if she doesn't know this judge very well, he's an authority figure, definitely, that is obvious. And what has her past experience been with other authority figures in the past? Have they been harmful? If so, then automatically, bing, I am going to think of, well, I'm not going to even think, I'm going to respond without thinking of how I always respond to authority figures who have hurt me in the past. And so she's trying to protect herself. Now, this doesn't mean that you allow kids to lie. That's not what we're talking about here. There is a time and place to talk to them about those lies and have the consequences set. But in that moment, we've got to help that child become calm and calm her central nervous system so that she can converse and say what needs to be said and be honest and accept the help that's provided or the consequences that are being provided for that. And so there may be other reactions you can think of if in your own situation with kids and they just responded in a way that was maladaptive and wasn't good, and you don't know why they did that. And a lot of it, if not almost all of it, has to do with their trauma. So the moral of the story here is a youth may act rashly under stress, even if they technically know better, because they do know better. They're not stupid. Okay, they know better, but in the moment, we're talking about a snap decision, because that's what you do when you're trying to save your life. You make a snap decision, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the next one, so we have sensory input, we're taking in information, and we have information processing. So we're processing everything that's going, that we're bringing in. That's what your brain is doing all the time, all day. And this is how individuals perceive, how they analyze, how they manipulate, how they use and remember information. So we're going to start with a handy little part of your brain called the hippocampus. There you can see in the picture. It is responsible for putting experience into chronological order and into perspective. It's responsible for integrating the raw sensory data into a coherent picture, putting a time tag on it, and transferring it into long-term memory where it can be retrieved later. Not everything is transferred into long-term memory, just what the brain thinks is important that we need to remember. It's also responsible for the ability to store and retrieve those memories. And individuals may have difficulty storing and recalling information, especially those who have trauma. And stress increases the cortisol, which also damages the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is very, very interesting and very important part of our lives, because that's where we get all our memory from. It's from that tiny little thing there on the brain. And when someone's experienced trauma, it literally shrinks. That's scientific data that the hippocampus shrinks when trauma happens. The reason why it's shrinking is because if trauma is happening, that means I'm in danger. And so everything in my body is going to a different part of my body so that I don't die or I don't get hurt. And so there's no need for your hippocampus. And that's why it's people have such a hard time recalling information when they've been traumatized. And it's because it's not collecting all of it. It's collecting maybe bits and pieces of it. You know, back in the day when we used to watch films or movies, it was on a reel, right? And there was a film and you wrap it around the reel and that turns and goes in front of a light of some sort and it projects the picture onto the wall. And, you know, you can watch things happen in chronological order, like, you know, a scene in a movie or a whole movie. Well, imagine if part of that film was cut and then two different parts were taped together. And you have a whole chunk there of the movie missing and it doesn't make sense. And that's what kind of happens with the hippocampus. It's like taking a piece of film out and you've got a chunk of your life missing. If you've been working with those who've been trafficked long enough, you know that they don't remember everything. There's big chunks of their life or pieces of their life that they just have no clue what's happened to them and they can't recall it. And that's because the brain was focused on surviving, not recording everything that was happening. So it makes it really difficult and really hard, especially if you're being interviewed by law enforcement about what happened. If you have to retell your story in court or tell your story to an advocate or tell your story to people at a home, it can make you very nervous because you're not quite understanding the whole story yourself. What happens is after trauma, your hippocampus works to remember the event accurately and to make sense of it. It does try to do that, but it didn't store all the information. All the information didn't get coded correctly when a person is overwhelmed. And an individual will have trouble remembering important details of the event or might find themselves thinking a lot about what happened because their hippocampus is working so hard to try to make sense of things. Trauma impairs the hippocampus from imagining future experiences because we recall past experiences to evaluate future options. So it's very interesting and it makes it very difficult as a survivor and probably as someone who's working with a survivor who's trying to get accurate information. And I'm going to give you an example of this. So I told you in the beginning that I was trafficked as a kid. And at 15 years old, I was trafficked. I was trafficked for 21 days, but for years, I did not know that. I thought it was just a couple of nights. I didn't think it lasted that long. I wasn't gone that long. And that's what I believed in my head for many, many years. I did have someone that was there that I was friends with and stayed in relation with for many years after that. And when it would come up in conversation, like, I don't know how many years later it was, and I referenced that, yeah, you know, those couple of days I was gone, they're like, wait, hold on. What do you mean a couple of days? You were gone for a couple of weeks. Like, we had pictures up around you, around town. No one knew where you were. We didn't know what happened to you. We were all looking for you. And I was like, what do you mean a couple of weeks, right? I really thought maybe he was wrong and remembering it wrong because I was very sure that I was just gone for a couple of nights. So then later on, after that, like many, many years later, I learned that I could get my police reports from all the times I've been in trouble with the law as a kid. So I wanted to really just get it to kind of see, like, how many times did I have interactions with the police? Because I have no clue. I was always being picked up is what it felt like in my head. Always having interactions being picked up with the police. I wonder how many times it actually was. So I got a hold of all my records. And in those is where I learned that, yes, I was missing for 21 days from the day that the police report was made that I was missing to the day that I was picked up. Right. So, things that, and I learned a whole host of stuff that in my head, chronologically, when it comes to time, was recorded wrong. And that's because my brain didn't care about the order of things that was happening. It's trying to protect myself in order to survive. And so that's why those who have been trafficked are always in fight, flight, or flee mode. Did I say that right? Fight. Get my words mixed up. Anyways, you know what I'm talking about. And if we're always in that mode, then we're always just in the moment trying to figure out, am I safe? What do I need to do to protect myself? And it doesn't matter if I'm in danger or not. That's the interesting part. It doesn't matter if I'm in danger or not. And so my hippocampus remains shrunk. It's not recording information. And I have lots of gaps in my history that I have no clue what happened to me, what was going on, what I was doing. Right. And thankfully, the one good thing that came out of being picked up by the police all the time was I now have a chronological order of events of the way things happened when I went to this girl's home, when I stayed in this girl's home, when I was brought back to my family's home. It's all in there. And in my head, it was kind of backwards. Like the events were the same, but the order that it happened is backwards. And so that just was a real relief to me as a survivor of trauma that I'm not stupid. This is a real thing. And it helped me in my healing process understand this is why I have gaps in my memory and why I don't remember everything. So the role of memory is to form future actions based on our ability to remember our past. And that was one of the things that it mentioned on the previous slide is about our future. A lot of survivors can't really think that they even have much of a future. And that's because our past was so horrible. And so if my past is so horrible, it must mean that I'm not going to live long, or my life's not going to be that great. I don't have anything to really look forward to. This is my life. This is all I know. So they stay stuck in what they know. That happens to a lot of people. They stay stuck in what they know. And what I know is my experience. And so this is all I'm good for. And so all those things their trafficker tells them, like, no one's going to want you. This is all you're good for. You're used up now. You might as well stay with me. You have no future with anyone else. Everyone's going to judge you. Whatever the words is that they're saying to them, it makes sense because that's how my whole past has been. And so the role of memory, I've got to be able to make some changes, and I need people in my life to help me understand what happened to me, why things are the way they are, and what changes. How do I make changes in my life? How do I get out of this? Is this even possible? I worked in a I worked at one, but I volunteered first at a correctional facility for girls and worked with just girls who have been trafficked. When I came in there as a survivor of trafficking and told them, they didn't know I was, they just thought there's another woman in there who was going to come and just, tell them how great things can be. But then they learned I'm a survivor. They learned I'm a licensed counselor. I went to college. I have a family. I have a home. Literally their jaws dropped. And one of the most common things I heard throughout my whole time working with them, about 18 months, was I had no idea I could do anything or be anything else. And so that's why it's really important to have survivors working with you and the youth that you're working with so that they can have an idea that it's possible, because literally their memory is not allowing them to think that there is a future other than what they're stuck in. So the next one I want to talk about, and I've been purposely not saying this name, is the amygdala. And a lot of you may have heard about the amygdala. It is our alarm system. The amygdala is amazing. It literally is what keeps us alive. That's what it does. It keeps us alive. It alerts us when there's fire, right? Just like your smoke alarm in your house alerts you when it smells smoke, there must be fire. It wakes you up, makes a loud sound. Our amygdala makes a loud sound. It catalogs past sensory experiences like threats and anger as implicit memories, memories that are unconscious but can affect thoughts and behaviors. And these memories are readily primed in order to quickly associate them with future situations that are stressful or threatening. And this enables an instant response to danger. So this is what you're seeing. If you're seeing kids that are having behavior issues, repeating the same thing over and over again and not getting any better, you're witnessing their amygdala in action. So that's what it really all comes down to. This output, we got the sensory, we got the information processing, and we have this amygdala that tells us what to do. And it doesn't have a conversation with you. It's not sitting there thinking, should I hit this person, or should I cuss at this person, or what should I do here? Would be the right thing? No, it's saying, yeah, do whatever the heck you can to save your life. What do you know what saved you in the past? Well, maybe it's cussing someone out saved me in the past. Maybe it's running away from home, thought, saved me in the past. Maybe it's fighting back, saved me in the past. Maybe it is being completely compliant and doing everything you say has saved me in the past, right? Those are all common things that you will see exhibited from survivors and their behavior. So, so here's an example for yourself, right? Your amygdala has probably saved you a lot. You're driving down the road, someone cuts you off. Your automatic response is to slam on the brakes so you don't hit them and get in an accident, right? Your amygdala, you guys didn't have a conversation as to whether you should slam on the brakes or not. You just did without thinking. And that was a good thing because it saved you. So when someone who's been trafficked, they've been beat or seen other people beat, been harmed in multiple ways, physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever it may be, they learn to survive and how to deal with that. And so then when I'm not in danger anymore, that's the only way I know to survive. We call it flipping our lid. So here's our brain when it's calm. Here's our brain. If you can't see my hand, I'm holding up like the number 4. That's what it looks like when our lid is flipped. So when my lid is flipped, it's all day long. As someone who's been trafficked, I'm walking around with my amygdala on all day. And I'm constantly looking for danger, because what was my life prior to being recovered from trafficking? It was this, my amygdala on all day, because every day I'm seeing a bear, whether it's in an abusive family growing up, whether I was sold by my family members, whether I was trafficked as a teenager and I was in an abusive household before then, right? I'm out on the streets for how many years, or I'm often on the streets. It's about survival. And so when your amygdala is constantly on, that means your hippocampus isn't working fully. It's not recording all the information. I'm not able to recall everything I need to recall. I'm not able to respond the way that you want me to respond, because I'm like this all the time. My fire alarm is constantly saying, danger, danger. Do I need to fight? Do I need to run? Do I need to comply and just do what they say and get it over with, right? Which is why that doesn't work, because it's not a heart change. We've got to really be careful about those we're working with who are complying. Those are our favorite people. They did what we said. They don't give any pushback, but do they have a voice? How will they be able to protect themselves in the future, from danger, from someone who does not have my best interest at heart? And so we've got to help turn off the amygdala, and we've got to start building new neural pathways for survivors and help them learn how to do that. So that's the motor output. You have your receptor that's taking in information, whether it's through your sight, as it shows in the picture, or another one of your other senses. It takes it to the brain processes it. It's not going to process it well if we're under stress. And then we have a response. And we who are working with those who've been trafficked are seeing the response. And you may not always be seeing a good response. And that is because they don't know, we need to help them, their brain relax and regulate is actually a more appropriate term, so that they can choose an effective response. So based on the sensory input and integration, The nervous system responds by sending signals to muscles, causing them to contract, or to glands, causing them to respond. Right? So we went through the sensory, information processing, and now motor output, my behavior, how you are seeing me. So here's some real life scenarios I'm going to tell you about from those who have experienced trafficking and how their nervous system affected their response. And maybe I'm sure your wheels are turning like, yeah, okay, this has been happening with the girls and boys or women that I've been working with. All right, so when I was volunteering at a correctional facility with young trafficked females, there was a young lady who was always assaulting a correctional officer. And it seemed to happen with the same one. And so what happens when you assault or hit someone, you go to security, you catch a charge, maybe a felony charge, probably. And then you end up, if you get enough of those, never getting out of the correctional facility and going to adult prison and serving more time. So why is this kid doing this? No one knew. They just looked at her as a bad kid that just is disrespectful. So sitting down with her and talking with her just about her life, she was opening up to me, not focusing on the assaults that she was doing. She started talking about a buyer who repeatedly was buying her and was very mean and cruel and rough. And it was a huge trigger, a very traumatic memory. And this person was bald. And the light just came on as she was talking about it. And she associated it with her anger towards this correctional officer, right? So being able to be in a relaxed state without her lid flipped and just casually talking connected some dots together. And basically what happened was she wasn't able to process. Her amygdala is telling her she's in danger. I don't care who this is. It's a bald guy. I know a bald guy from the past. We need to protect ourselves from all bald men. I'm sure it's not a long conversation with your amygdala, but that's what your amygdala is like. Boom, bald guy. Get away, stay away, do whatever you can to not get hurt. When this person's just probably telling her it's time to go to lunch, right? So we talked about it. We had another female officer that would tell her what to do because she still had to be told what to do. And she stopped assaulting people. She advanced in the program. She did very, very well. And she didn't get sent to adult prison, all because she stopped racking up charges because we figured out what that trigger was. So we could have, she was being looked at as a bad, disrespectful kid because it is a bad thing to hurt people. But we figure out what's going on in the brain and why is she reacting? Is this a trigger response to something? Is our amygdala telling her she's in danger when she's not? That's what was happening. Then we're able to bring that to her attention, focus on it in counseling, switch correctional officers for a while, and then everything was fine. And so that's just one example of how our brain affects our behavior. Here's another one. This is actually a picture of me when I was 15 years old. I was a chronic runaway. And I met my trafficker when I was 15 while waiting for friends at an apartment complex. So sorry, I just read the comments real quick because I was hoping people could still hear me. Okay. So I was a chronic runaway and no one asked me why I kept running away from home all the time. Why would I want to be back out on the streets? Why would I want to be with a trafficker? And I didn't feel like anyone really cared to even listen. I'd get picked up off the streets and I get brought right back home to the place where I was being hurt and abused. So what was happening is that I was not a fighter. My response was flight. Something bad goes on at home, I run out to the streets because they were kinder and nicer to me out there. And I believed my trafficker when I met them, when he told
Hello,
me.
Ilda.
Hello? Okay, sorry, I just heard a voice there for a minute. When he told me he was going to protect me. And so my amygdala is telling me that I'm safer out there. My prefrontal cortex isn't responding well or making good decisions. I put myself in some really, really dangerous, bad situations. But then when you get in those situations, you realize, oh crap, right? And then you just try to figure out how to not die and get yourself out of those situations. And then you make it out and you're like, I can do this. See, if I go back home, I'm just going to keep getting hurt, but I can survive out here. And so you keep coming back on the street under this false pretense that I know what I'm doing and I can survive. When we all know that within 24 hours, if you're a runaway, you're probably meeting up or talking, a trafficker has made connections with you as a teenage runaway, and it's very dangerous. But because I've survived so many situations, I am processing it as I'm okay. This is just life, and it's better than what I'm facing at my home, because I have a bear living in my house, always attacking me at my house, but not here, because here I'm told they love me, even though he's doing things that doesn't portray love. I don't know that because I've never seen love before. I just see a raging bear. And so again, you have another situation that could have been handled differently, actually could have been prevented from being trafficked, because if someone would have started asking questions, could have taken me out of that situation and found a better situation for me to be in, where I could learn what real love is and what your guardian or parents, how they should be taking care of you. All right, hang on. Okay, here we go. All right, here's one more story. This actually is a recent one. It says a young lady in a safe home demands a staff member to tell her she loves her, and she throws things at the staff member when they refuse to. This is actually happened to me. I was the staff member. So this young lady was extremely codependent, always needed to know that people liked her or loved her. And if they didn't, or if they disagreed, her world would absolutely fall apart. So it actually would have been doing me more harm to say, oh, of course I love you. My actions show that enough that I really care about her a lot. And because of my own past, I'm very, very careful about how I use the word love and who I love. I care about a lot of people, and I deeply care about people. But I really try to reserve that word love for people who I'm very close to in my everyday family, like my kids and my husband or other family members or really close friends. But it doesn't mean I don't care. And so what happened when she demanded, because she got tired of me never saying it back, is she actually threw stuff at me. She threw a water bottle at me. It didn't hit me, but very easily I could have become very defensive and be like, how dare you throw stuff? I'm here every day dealing with your personality, right? Every day trying to help you, calm down, to be able to learn and heal. I'm offering all my time. You're getting more attention from me than others because of her diagnosis, which was borderline personality disorder. So, but because I know that this is not her, this isn't how she wants to be. She truly doesn't want to be this way. I was able to stand there and stay calm and not flip my lid while her lid was flipped. I'm like this, allowing her to process and making sure I'm safe and not going to get hurt at the same time, which helps her calm. So I'm co-regulating with her. And then after that, we're actually able to talk about it, have a meaningful conversation that actually shows a lot of love, even though I don't say it. And then there's discipline about throwing things, right? Doesn't mean that you get away with abusive behavior. But if I would have disciplined her when she was like this and her lid was flipped, it would have done no good. It wouldn't have helped her at all. More than likely, she would have left the program and continued her cycle of craziness because her life was crazy. It was out of control. And it's not adaptive to society. Our goal is that they're not maladaptive behavior anymore, right? And now this young lady is moving into her own place, has kept a job for quite a while, which she's never done before. And it just requires patience, which you can only have if you have understanding and empathy for what's going on, right? And then you use the discipline when it's necessary for behavior that isn't conducive to living in a home or in society. And they're able to accept that because they know they did wrong, right? But you have to do it at the right time if you can help co-regulate with them and help them to be at a place where they can understand and see what they did wrong. And it gives them a voice in all of that. So here's some obvious factors also that affect youth. We have family, home life, emotions, hormones, all of that is just what affects every teenager, and it affects them also. They might not even have the option of family to go home to. Their home life may have been a complete wreck all the way since birth. And then they have the normal teenage hormones and emotions that they're dealing with every day. So if you're working with those who are trafficked, I'm assuming all of you on here are, because you're wanting to learn more about how to do that. This is hard work and takes a lot of patience to do so. So if you have teenagers, you know how hard it is to have a teenager. You know, I've had 4, I've got 1 left out of my 4. And so far he's my calmest child, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. I'm always trying to make sure he has a voice, right? We got to be careful with complete compliance. So, all right. So the way to help our youth do better is to understand why they struggle. That's the whole point of this thing. The neuropsychology of trafficking trauma, we want to understand why they're struggling. It's really the only way you're going to be able to properly help them. 100% of the time, it seems to me, so far in my life, with working with those who have survived trafficking and with my own self, is a connection with people and building rapport. I've come to the idea that most programs out there are good programs, but if they can't connect and build rapport with the people that are in there that they're serving, it's going to fail. And so we have to really be conscious about our own attachment styles, right? Haven't even talked about that, and hopefully you've taken some courses on attachment styles, because it would be really critical when you're working with survivors to know your attachment style, because theirs are going to be disorganized and ambivalent all over the place, but you need to have a secure attachment style and model that for them. And so we model that and are able to connect when they know, because they're going to know when you understand them. They're going to know. And that's going to bring down so many barriers, which is why this is so helpful. And if you can actually explain to them what you learned here and other things that you've learned about trauma, it's going to go such a long ways in helping in their recovery, because finally things will start making sense in their head, and they'll stop telling themselves they're crazy and they're stupid and they'll never get anywhere, that their trafficker and all their other abusers got them to told them, and now they don't need them anymore to tell them that, because they believe it and they keep telling themselves that, and we need to change that narrative. So in summary for this section here, why do traffic youth struggle? The prefrontal cortex not fully developed and has decreased in function and activation due to trafficking trauma. The hippocampus is strong, so we're not recording much information. If they don't remember things, they literally are not just conveniently forgetting it. They are not remembering things. You tell them what to do, they may not be remembering it because they're in survival mode. Amygdala is mostly on all the time. I am always trying to figure out how to survive. And that is why we want to bring survivors like myself into thriving and being independent and successful, not just surviving. Surviving is good. It's the first step, but we've got to get them out of that, have their amygdala calm down so that we can actually remember things and record information and learn. You cannot learn if your brain is acting this way, period. You cannot learn. You have to feel safe and secure to be able to learn. And then you have family trauma, possible unstable home life, and normal teenage hormones. So what I want to transition to now is how can you help, right? I know sometimes we can just feel at a loss. Teenagers are the most difficult to help because they're so quick to make rash decisions because of everything we just talked about here. They need constant guidance and patience, and they need a voice, right? It's important that whoever's you're coming in contact with, that you find a safe way to connect with them. If you have the opportunity to continually come in contact with them, then that's even better, because you're going to build this standard of safety with them that they'll be able to really hear you and listen to you over time. And they may not at first, and you can't expect them to, because you got to think about who are the people that are buying kids. Think about that. Who are they? They're not from any one walk of life, right? They're from all walks of life, from the bus driver to the doctor, to the police officer, to the teacher, to my dad or my neighbor's dad, right? To my cousin and to his friend. So why should I trust you? Most of the time, they're probably thinking, yeah, you're probably a buyer, right? A lot of women and boys wonder that when they're interacting with people, if they're a buyer or not, with any people, period. Doesn't matter if you're an authority or not. Are they a buyer? And so over time, you can find a connection with them so that they feel safe. And there's some things that you can do to help them feel that safety. And that's by increasing dopamine and oxytocin. And you do this through safe touch. And a lot of people freak out about safe touch, like, oh my gosh, we can't touch kids, but you can. You can do a fist bump. You can do a high five. You can do an elbow bump. You can place your hand on their shoulder, just as simple as that. Safe touch increases dopamine and oxytocin, which gives them the feeling of connecting and having a good experience with you. There's also appropriate eye contact. And so some people demand and want you to look at them when they're talking to them, right? Don't do that with survivors. They're all taught to not have eye contact. And so most of them will be looking down at the ground or looking away, not looking at anyone in there. So you can look at them, but don't look at them with really harsh eyes, and don't glare at them and never take your eyes off them. You need to start out with glancing, and you're talking and you look away, and you're talking and you glance back and you look, and you're trying to get them to have a feeling of safety, right? And so you're not glaring and looking into their eyes or demanding them look at you. You're giving them the choice on whether they're going to look or not, and you're not intimidating them by looking at them, because all of you are a figure of authority. All of you, whether you're an advocate or a judge or an attorney or, I don't know, law enforcement, anyone who's an adult, a child feels has authority over them. And so that's intimidating, because all these people that have bought them have had some type of power and authority over them. So appropriate eye contact is really important, and it's good to build with them. You want them to have eye contact with you, but you've got to do it in a safe way where they can eventually feel comfortable with you over time, because they were taught not to have eye contact. There's also appropriate voice. So we have your tone, your volume, and your cadence to watch out for. So this kind of gets under my skin, but sometimes I hear, actually a lot, I'll hear people say, oh, I'm so glad you came today. That was such a big step for you. You are so courageous. Oh my gosh, this was like the biggest move. I am so thankful you're here. Was a really good choice. Okay, you're talking down to them. Most of these kids are pretty hardcore. They've been through a lot. And I talk to kids the same way I'm talking to you right now. I don't change it. I don't change who I am or how I talk when I'm talking to a child, unless it's a baby that can't talk. That's the only time you're going to hear me going, oh, Google Gaga, right? Is with a baby. Other than that, I'm literally talking to a 3-year-old in the same tone of voice as I am with you, unless I'm being goofy and playing with them. You do not want to offend survivors by talking down to them. Talk to them just normal. If you're struggling getting their attention, it's really good to change your volume and start, you're talking normal, but what happens when you start lowering your voice and you're talking quieter, right? A lot of people come in, if you could hear me during that, when I lowered my voice, and it draws people in more to listen. But changing the volume of your voice can get their attention. When I was a high school teacher, I worked at a small high school where judges sent all their kids to that got kicked out of public school. And that's where they had to go. So most kids had ankle monitors on, and we had a rehab facility next door. Half the kids were enrolled and participating in rehab, and the other half were as high as a kite on something. And so the kids who were sober were sleeping a lot, and, because they're trying to, they're detoxing, and the other kids are, I don't even know how to explain it. They're everywhere, all over the place. And so I really learned I had to learn how to do a song and a dance to keep their attention. And it's amazing how, when you can fluctuate your voice and what you're saying, how it affects the children and gets them to listen. But make sure that's appropriate for your context, where you're at, what you're doing. And just basically, I think the main point is not talking down to them or using any kind of sing-song language at all. There's also behavior matching. And so behavior matching is really important. And it's something that they're not going to notice. You don't want to do any type of negative behavior matching. But if a kid's leaning back in their chair, you may want to lean back. If they're forward like this, then you reach forward. If they're like this, then put their hand under their chin, then you do that. If they got a pin in their hand and they're just kind of like, kind of playing around with it, you can put a pin in your hand and just kind of play around with it. If they got their legs crossed, you can cross your legs. One thing I wouldn't match, though, of course, is any negative behavior that does not promote a secure attachment, such as, throwing the finger or anything like that. Obviously, we want it to be appropriate and we want it to be positive. Avoid sitting like this with your arms crossed across your chest. It shows that you're closed off and you're not willing to listen and you don't care, even if you're not thinking that. That's what it looks like. And so behavior matching helps connection. This is a really important one. This last one is offering choices within boundaries. So obviously it has to be within boundaries, because if you offer a kid a choice, he's going to make a choice that's not the best for them, especially if they are, if their amygdala is heightened and they're not able to make those good decisions or recall good information because their prefrontal cortex isn't fully functioning or their hippocampus is shrunk, right? All of that is affecting their choices, which is why they are at where they are today. And so you do it within boundaries, but what it does is it gives them a voice. It's not just about the fact of giving them a choice. It's very productive, and it's giving them a voice, which they haven't had before. No one's given a crap about them. People are making decisions for them. Their trafficker makes decisions for them. If they had a bottom, their bottom's making decisions for them. They have to do everything that they're told unless they want to suffer the consequences of getting hurt in some way. And so the fact that you're giving them a choice in what's going to happen to them in their life goes a long way. But here's what that actually does. And this, I think, is just profound. And that is that you are letting them practice making healthy decisions for themselves. And that is critical, because they've only been practiced making bad decisions for themselves, if they've been given any choice at all to make a choice. But when you practice letting them make healthy choices, you're actually building neural pathways in their brains to do better. Because if I don't get to practice it under guidance and within boundaries, then I'm not going to make it when I'm an adult. So when these kids turn into adults, they continue the cycle of abuse, right? And they continue this destructive behavior and in maladaptive relationships, and they have children, and those children experience, and we continue the cycle. But if we can actually help them build new neural pathways in their brain, which is the path that my brain takes to make a choice to go from A to B, right? But right now, I only have unhealthy pathways. That's all I know. So I need someone to help me build new ones. And so when you give me a chance to make a choice that's healthy and I have a good experience, right, I start to want to walk down that pathway more. And as I make good choices more, it becomes stronger. And these ones that are bad choices become weaker. And I will make them less, right? They may not completely go away right away, but over time, I will not make those choices anymore. But I need to practice, which is why it's really critical that we give them a voice to help them practice that. And if it doesn't work out well, then we talk about why. You know, whenever someone that I'm working with makes a choice, it seems like it's going to be a good choice and it turns out poorly. I don't blame them, criticize them, or tell them, well, you must have messed it up. We talk about where was the trigger, what happened, was it you, was it something someone else did, how can we correct this, and what's another good choice we can make, because they're not always going to work out right? Life doesn't always work out well, and we think we're doing well and it doesn't turn out that way. And so talking about them, giving them a voice is really, really critical. And so you're giving them these boundaries so that you just give them options of safety, things that are good that they can choose from. And that will go a long ways, and they will remember that, especially if they mess up again, that you're a safe person to come to because you believe in me. You believe that I can do this, that I can get better because you've trusted me to make some decisions about my life. I was sent to a girl's home when I was 15 after I was found from trafficking. But I didn't have a choice on that, on where I would go. I didn't even know I was going there. I was just put in a car and taken there. And so my experience of that, of all of a sudden being picked up out of my environment and in a strange environment where I knew no one or nothing or who I was even allowed to communicate with, was traumatizing. And so immediately I started planning my escape. Immediately, that place was never going to work out for me, and it didn't. And I escaped and I ran, and I was in some really bad situations after that because of it. But if someone would have talked to me and say, you know, we don't have any other choices, this is it, and this is where you need to go, tell me about it, prepare me for it, why am I going there, right? It helps me have a voice to be able to talk about it, even if that's the only one. And so keep that in mind as you're working with survivors. All right, so that's my contact information, TonyMcKinley.com or contact@TonyMcKinley.com. That's all I have for you today. We're going to go and look at the questions now that you guys have posted, and hopefully I can answer those for you the best I can. I'm going to take this screen off. I think I hit escape. Yeah, so I can go to the website and bring up the questions. Let's see. I did have it up, but then I think I might have, oh no, there it is. Perfect. Okay. All right. Okay, so there are some good questions on here. I'll just start with the first one and go in order here. It says, what is the best way to handle physical aggression in minors in placement with complex PTSD? That's a great question. First of all, I would highly suggest getting trained in trust-based relational intervention or something similar to that. It's TBRI for short. And it helps you how to de-escalate situations with kids who have a lot of physical aggression or emotional aggression. They're highly emotional and they react right away. And it's perfect. I love it. I use it with my own kids, even though they don't have a lot of physical aggression. But I use it with adults also. And it teaches them how to regulate. And that's what they need. They need to know how to regulate. If you sit down and talk to a kid that blacks out, right? I've had many kids tell me after they assault someone, I just blacked out. I wasn't even there. I don't even know what happened. That's how bad it gets. And so they don't want to do this. They usually regret it tremendously afterwards when they've calmed down. But I can catch it low. That's the number one thing. Before it gets up here high, where they're hitting people, right? I need to figure out, when did this start escalating? And it's usually way down here below, something starts irritating them, right? That's where I need to catch it. And that's where I need to start using my skills so that it never gets up here. And TBRI will teach you all about that. I'm a TBRI practitioner. I've done a lot of training on it. I don't have the time here to do, but I would highly suggest you look it up and practice it in your everyday life if you end up getting trained in it. because that's the only way that you're going to use it if you're used to just living your life with these principles of how to catch behavior low before it escalates and gets up here. And it will save a lot of kids, especially if you're in a detention facility or whatnot, from catching more charges. And it'll save their life, right? It's, literally, these kids don't want to do that, but they black out and they don't even see it coming. Which books would you recommend to a transitioning age youth who is trying to learn about trauma? Oh, that's such a great question. Okay. I don't have any that I can recommend. I'm not saying they're not out there, but we do need some if you want to write one, because kids do want to understand it. Now, because I specifically work with trafficking survivors, I have written a book about the trauma that they experience, and it helps them understand their experience. So if you're working with someone who's experienced trauma, I would definitely recommend my book called What Happened to Me: Healing for Sex Trafficking Survivors. I've got 2 editions. One is just the book that you read. The second edition is has study questions in it at the end of each chapter, so you can talk about and learn more about what you learned. But I specifically wrote it while I was working in a correctional facility who we had kids with different kinds of trafficking experiences, not just pimp trafficking, but gang trafficking and familial trafficking. And if you're talking about pimp trafficking, the ones with familial trafficking just aren't getting it. They're like, this is not what I experienced. I don't know what you're talking about. So I was constantly trying to gather information, and most information out there is about pimp trafficking. And I just decided to write it. And so I asked my survivor sisters out there who have written books about their experience of trafficking, if I could use certain excerpts in it and quote them to teach kids about different kinds of trafficking. And so they all can participate together. And so not only do they learn about what happened to them, which is really important to help break the trauma bond, but I also talk about the psychological part of it in the second half of the book, and about counseling and the importance of that and what it can do for you. And it has been, I only wrote it for while I was leading this group, but I ended up publishing it because so many people wanted it. And I use it myself in the home that I'm directing right now for adults. And so it has helped a lot. I've had kids write me who were being groomed for trafficking, who weren't trafficked, who got a hold of the book, and it stopped them from being trafficked, because we talk about grooming and what that looks like. So that's the only book I can really recommend for that if you're working for those who've been trafficked. The way you're demonstrating flipping your lid in your brain by opening and closing your hand over your thumb is now an accepted nonverbal signal that you are being abused in some fashion and you need help. Are you safe? Oh, wow. I had no idea. That's a new thing. That is not good, because literally there's diagrams on this that you can find about what flipping your lid looks like. So that's interesting. Thanks for letting me know. But yes, I am safe. Thank you. Are there treatments to overcome the neurological damage to the nervous system and memory loss? Well, first of all, yeah, just really talking about what happened to you helps a lot. Going through different treatments like EMDR can help with disassociating and connecting the dots. And especially if you're experiencing a lot of disassociation, EMDR can help, and it helps eliminate a lot of those triggers so that you're not always reacting to your environment all the time. Memory loss, though, there's memory I've just accepted I'll never get back. And now that I've learned more about the hippocampus, I just don't think my brain recorded it, because at the time it was more important to save my life or not get hurt instead of recording everything that was happening. So I think, yes, there is really just counseling in general. There's all types of different therapies out there that can help. But as far as memory goes, if someone's just trying to remember, you may have bits and pieces come back, but the big chunk of it's just gone and it's not going to come back. And I don't know of any therapy that can make it come back. And I just don't think that the brain even recorded it so there is nothing to bring back because it's not there. So unless you have someone that witnessed it or was around, it can help you put pieces together to help you with your memory, or things like I used my police report that helped connect some dots that I didn't know was there. For instance, when I was actually found, when I was trafficked at 15 and I was found, the person who found me, police recorded down what happened when they came on the scene. And I don't remember any of this, but the guy who recognized me and found me and called the police was sitting on top of me, and I was kicking and screaming because I didn't want to go with the police because they were going to take me right back to where I was being abused before. And I didn't look at that as any better situation. And so I had no idea. I have no memory of it. But because I have a police report that says I was kicking and screaming and hitting and cussing and yelling, otherwise I would have never known. So I don't think that's ever going to come back to me. It didn't come back to me, matter of fact. It's just based off what I've read. So it's very interesting, the brain and how it records stuff. How do you explain the neurological changes in response to trauma to younger children in a way that is easy to understand? Well, I'm not sure what you mean by younger children, if you're talking like elementary school age or toddler age. Of course, you have to do it in a way that's appropriate. So I don't know. I mean, that's what part neurological changes. So are you talking about like the memory issue and memory loss? I mean, I would just tell them you could use pictures to explain it. You could, draw a diagram to it. And I don't know. I don't have an easy answer for that one, but would love to sit down and talk to you more about it. What resources do you recommend for us to learn our attachment styles? Are there any reputable online assessments? Well, actually, there are, and we could send out an email if there was an email list with some websites. But TBRI, first of all, if you want to get trained in that, is going to teach you about your attachment style, and you go through a whole assessment to learn what your attachment style is. And so I did not have a secure attachment style as a kid, but what I have now is called earned secure, meaning that I became secure in my attachment style, but I was not as a child. And that's where you want your kids to have a secure attachment style, is as a child, learn how to have that. So it's important to learn what yours is, because that'll help you understand your own relationships and why you fall in and out of them, or get in fights, or feel lonely, or not connected to people. And you can become earned secure attachment. So I would definitely, on YouTube, there's lots of videos about attachment style. The Karen Purvis Institute, who came up with trust-based relational intervention, talks a lot about attachment styles, and you can learn a lot there too without even doing their training. Tony, thank you for sharing your journey and lived experiences and work with survivors. Did you meet anyone in the system helping agencies when you were a teen who finally asked, "How are you? Why do you keep leaving home? Is someone hurting you? What led to you leaving the life?" Yeah, no, I didn't. But then again, I'm old, even if you don't think I look like it. I grew up in the 80s, and there just wasn't a lot. And it was really a pull them up by your bootstraps and obey me type of environment. I never went to counseling, and I literally just survived. That's it. I literally just survived. And it wasn't until I was an adult in my own reckless life that I started wanting to make things better for my kids so that I didn't repeat the process. And it was a long process. I learned everything myself. And then in school, when I started going to school. But basically, what led me to probably the first change in my life was at the age of 18, I was being trafficked by a retired police officer. And a friend helped me get out of that situation. And I don't know, I was just fed up by then. I couldn't believe I fell for it. I couldn't believe I got stuck in it and couldn't get out. And I was living in the hood with my boyfriend, my new boyfriend, who helped me get out of this situation. And I didn't know what to do to survive except to go strip. And there was no way I was going to do that. I knew I could make a lot of money doing it. And I was making $3.35 an hour flipping pizzas, which is easier back then. It's not as easy now to make minimum wage and try to live on your own. But I was just determined in my head not to go back to it. And so I went to a community college and said, "Hey, I want to go to school. Can you help me?" I did not test into any classes. I had to take all high school classes. It was a long, long journey to get through college, but I just kept remembering how I felt, and that was enough to keep me out. I think eventually, from what I've learned with working with many different people, is people just get tired. And I got tired at 18, but not everyone does. Some people get tired at 35, and I just got tired and I lived through it. And others who got tired at 35 lived through it. And finally at 35 are just adamant that they're never going back. So were there certain approaches, activities, providers, or people in your life used to connect with you as a teen survivor of trafficking to help build trust? What was most meaningful to you? No, I can't think of anything, which makes it even kind of more amazing that I'm even here today. I think I probably have some good work ethic as a young child in the beginning of my life that helped me get through that, but I really don't know what else to say about that. How do you determine and reinforce your personal boundaries with young people who are habitual line steppers? Yes! Oh, I totally get that. You have to be tough and you can't let your emotions get to you because you're going to want to give them everything that you never have. And you have to know that keeping your boundaries is going to help them and it's going to teach them. And you have to be willing to be looked at as the bad guy, even though you're not. You really do. And you have to be authentic. And that's what's going to keep them coming back. I have been cussed at. Oh, I can't tell you how mean kids have been to me when they try to manipulate me, right? Manipulation is a survival tool. It's not bad. I mean, it's bad, but that's how they lived, right? That's a skill that they learned on how they live. So I need to help them with that tool that they've learned, that skill, and turn it for good. And they're not, what they're doing is surviving, right? We call it manipulation is actually a survival skill. When you can look at it differently, it changes everything. It gives you so much more patience, but you do need to be a broken record. There's so many things I could say on this. So hopefully I've said a few to help you out. Can you explain EMDR? Yes, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Is amazing. I have used it. I have been through EMDR, and when I did it for myself, it changed my life in the direction of my life. And so I got trained in it as a licensed counselor and have used it on combat soldiers. I worked a lot with first responders and on trafficking survivors. And it's just eye movement. They're following your eye as they're thinking, or your hand or whatever you're going to use to have them follow, go back and forth. And thinking about a traumatic situation, not talking about it. And your brain knows where to go and knows how to heal. And it starts connecting the dots. And basically what it did was it helped me. I was so compartmentalized and would get stuck in different states of myself, whether a little kid or a teenager. And it helped combine all that together. So I'm a whole person and I can think and feel and communicate my whole brain together. And it literally changed my life. And so I highly recommend it if it's, it doesn't work for everyone from what I hear. I haven't met someone it hasn't worked on, but I really like it a lot. Okay, it is about a couple minutes. For providers who are first meeting young people, what would you recommend for education? Knowing the amygdala is firing, that might help them view the resources differently. Yeah, I think I kind of answered this before. I tend to, I've given them information that I find on the internet. I don't know how well it clicks with them. I know the best thing has been just talking to them, but I haven't looked in quite a while to see if there's any new information out there for kids to help them understand trauma in the brain and what's happening. But I have done a lot of group talks and sat with groups of kids and talked to them about it. And it just changes everything. It's the first step. If I can understand myself and what happened to me, is the first step to healing. I can come out of denial. I can start recognizing what I need to change. And so that's a really big deal. I think I answered all of them. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's see. I don't know if there's anything in the chat that anyone wants me to answer, but Lauren, I'll let you take it from here.
There is one more question in the chat. I had a question, Jason asks, I had a question with children being trafficked that are from different countries, having worked in a family residential center for 5.5 years with immigration as corrections officers. Besides the barrier of language, what can I do to help those from other backgrounds in different countries?
I think I answered all of them. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And let's see, I don't know if there's anything in the chat that anyone wants me to answer, but Lauren, I'll let you take it from here.
There is one more question in the chat. I had a question, Jason asks, I had a question with children being trafficked that are from different countries, having worked in a family residential center for 5.5 years with immigration as corrections officers. Besides the barrier of language, what can I do to help those from other backgrounds in different countries? And currently in process with customs, hoping to better myself to help others who have experienced sex trafficking and build trust.
Yeah, it's difficult, especially when there's a language barrier. I'd say the number one thing is just constantly trying to find resources for them. I haven't worked a whole lot with those who are immigrants and who don't speak English, just a little bit. And I know that it went really far for me to find someone who can communicate with them, and also find an attorney to represent them, even those who are in a correctional facility, because some of those kids will be taken back to their country of origin, and it could be really harmful, and they have someone who can fight for them if that's the case. But a lot of patience, because they're not going to be able to communicate with you and vice versa. I would say that if it's possible to find someone to communicate with them, that would be the number one thing. And for you, just, don't give up trying. I use Google Translate a lot. In some places you can't have your phone, so that might not work, but that has helped me a lot to use Google Translate to be able to communicate.
Thank you so much, Tony. And thank you everybody for joining us